When Leonard Daniels walked into the grand marble lobby of Eastbrook Financial, he didn't expect his dignity to be shattered in 5 seconds flat. But that's exactly what happened when Philip Carrington, a sharply dressed senior manager, took Leonard's ID card, glanced at it with disdain, and tossed it onto the floor like trash. The loud clink of plastic on stone echoed, louder than any insult. "I'm sorry," Philip said smugly, adjusting his imported tie. "But credentials like these don't inspire confidence. Perhaps you'd be better suited to a different institution." Leonard, a 60-year-old black man with quiet composure, crouched to pick up the card. His hands didn't tremble. His back didn't bend with defeat. Instead, he stood with the poise of a man who had seen storms far worse than arrogance. "I understand," Leonard said calmly. "I came here for a simple transaction, but clearly, this isn't the place for me." Philip smirked, dismissing Leonard as just another unimportant walk-in. What he didn't know was that Leonard Daniels wasn't just anyone. He was the retired founder of a multi-million-dollar construction firm, and the father of Isabella Daniels, the CEO of a tech conglomerate, about to sign a $5 billion partnership with Eastbrook Financial. What began as humiliation would soon become the costliest mistake of Philip's career, because some people carry a power that only reveals itself when they're underestimated. And Leonard Daniels? He was about to turn 5 seconds of disrespect into a billion-dollar downfall. The air inside Eastbrook Financial's executive dining lounge was rich with the scent of grilled salmon and arrogance. Philip Carrington, still basking in what he considered a triumphant moment from earlier that morning, leaned back in his leather chair and regaled his colleagues with what he called the most ridiculous thing I've seen this week. "You should have seen the look on the guy's face," he chuckled, swirling his wine. "Old man. Walks in like he owns the place. Shows me some dusty ID. I toss it on the floor politely, of course. Thought I'd save us the embarrassment before he asked for something we clearly can't offer." His assistant, Monica Reyes, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Philip, what if he really did own something? You didn't even check." Philip gave her a condescending smile. "Monica, I've been doing this for nearly a decade. I can tell who's a serious client and who's wasting our time. No gold card, no corporate attire, just another nobody hoping for a handout." The other managers laughed, though their laughter lacked conviction. Something about the man's quiet composure had unsettled even them. But none of them spoke. None of them questioned Philip's judgment, at least not out loud. What none of them realized was that Leonard Daniels, the man they had dismissed so quickly, was at that moment sitting in his daughter's kitchen, reviewing the final pages of a $5 billion contract. His daughter, Isabella Daniels, CEO of Daniels Global Tech, poured him coffee from a French press that cost more than Philip's entire suit. "You look tired, Dad," Isabella said, studying his face. "Something happened at the bank?" Leonard sipped his coffee, then calmly told her everything, from the moment Philip hurled his ID to the smug grin that followed. Isabella's expression shifted. Her usual calm gave way to something sharper, colder. "Philip Carrington," she repeated, the name clicking instantly. "I've seen that name on the Eastbrook proposal. He's the one assigned to oversee our onboarding." "Unbelievable." Leonard raised a brow. "You're still planning to move forward?" "I was. But now, that's up for review." Leonard smiled faintly. "No need to rush. Sometimes it's good to let people reveal their true selves before you make life-changing decisions." Later that evening, Leonard joined a video call with Isabella's senior partners. She introduced him not just as her father, but as her strategic advisor. For the next hour, Leonard asked precise, tactical questions about Eastbrook's inner operations timelines, points of contact, and most importantly, termination clauses. "What's their policy on discriminatory behavior?" Leonard asked casually. "We'll add that to the compliance checklist," one partner responded. But Leonard was already 2 steps ahead. He was archiving every LinkedIn post Philip had ever made, dozens of 20s era smug comments about maintaining standards, veiled jabs at unqualified applicants, and liked posts that questioned the reliability of minority-owned businesses. Over the next few days, Isabella's legal team combed through their contract with Eastbrook Financial. In Clause 17, they found their opportunity. Any proven act of the www. Discriminatory conduct by a representative of the institution may trigger immediate and penalty-free termination. Leonard provided them with a folder thick with damning evidence. Internal emails from a former Eastbrook employee. Screenshots. Statements. Everything meticulously cataloged. "We're not just canceling a contract," Isabella said. "We're making a statement." 3 days later, Leonard wore his best Hugo Boss suit, the same one he hadn't touched in years. This wasn't a day for modesty. It was a day to remind everyone exactly who he was. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked, glancing over the final paperwork. Leonard adjusted his cufflinks. "You can rebuild money, daughter. But dignity, once destroyed, takes a lifetime to restore." At Eastbrook Financial, Philip Carrington strutted into the office expecting a promotion. After all, he believed his rejection of unqualified clients was part of what kept the firm's reputation intact. But at 10 a.m., when he walked into the main conference room, his world collapsed. There sat Leonard Daniels, the man whose ID he had thrown on the floor, now dressed in elegance, calm as ever. Beside him, Isabella Daniels, powerful and poised. "Mr. Carrington," Isabella began coldly, "I believe you've already met my father." Philip went pale. I didn't know." "That he was someone important?" Leonard interrupted. "You didn't need to know who I was, only that I was a human being." The room fell silent. The regional director, stunned, tried to intervene, but Isabella cut him off. "We've decided to cancel our $5 billion partnership with Eastbrook," she said. "And Mr. Carrington's conduct helped make that decision very clear." Philip stammered, pleaded, even offered to resign. But the damage was done. "You judged me by my clothes," Leonard said, standing up. "I judged you by your character, and only one of us had anything of value to offer." As father and daughter walked out, the silence they left behind was more damning than any shouted accusation. By the time the day ended, Philip Carrington's name was trending across Eastbrook's internal network for all the wrong reasons. He had wanted to keep undesirables out of the bank, and in doing so, he had lost the most valuable client in the firm's history, all because he mistook dignity for weakness and pride for power. At the headquarters of Daniels Global Tech, sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling glass panels, casting a golden hue on the polished oak conference table where Leonard Daniels sat, quiet but commanding. In front of him were printouts, emails, screenshots, evidence collected over the past 72 hours. Around him, his daughter Isabella Daniels, CEO of the company, and her legal and financial teams sat in sharp focus. Their mission was clear: to dismantle the image of Eastbrook Financial as a trusted partner. Starting with Philip Carrington, Leonard placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward Dr. Harold Evans, Isabella's chief counsel. "This is everything I've gathered on Carrington. His LinkedIn activity, public posts, internal emails from a former Eastbrook employee, even footage from the day he threw my ID card on the floor." Harold's brows furrowed as he skimmed the documents. "These aren't just biased remarks," he said slowly. "This is a documented pattern of discrimination. If this becomes public, Eastbrook Financial could be liable for corporate misconduct and civil penalties." Leonard gave a slow nod. "We won't take it public yet, but we will use it." Across the room, Isabella stood beside a digital display that projected the Eastbrook partnership proposal. She tapped the screen. Clause 17. "We have the legal right to terminate the agreement without penalty in the event of discriminatory practices by their representatives." "And the financial impact?" Leonard asked calmly. Marcus Lynn, the CFO, responded. Severe, but not destructive. We'll lose some time, but Commonwealth National has already offered better rates and greater flexibility. We'll survive. They'll bleed. Leonard leaned back in his chair, his voice even. Then let's move forward. But I want Carrington in the room when we do it. The next morning, Eastbrook Financial buzzed with anticipation. Rumors had spread of a Toman, surprise strategic meeting involving Daniels Global Tech, their biggest prospective client. Carrington, oblivious, arrived early, polished his desk, ordered special coffee, and donned his gold tie, the one he saved for promotions. When Monica Reyes, his assistant, nervously entered his office at 9:45, Carrington was adjusting his lapel. Philip, she said quietly. They're here. Who? The Daniels family. Carrington frowned. You mean the man from the other day? And his daughter? Monica nodded. She's the CEO. Blood drained from Carrington's face. He typed Leonard's name into the internal database, and the result hit him like a truck. Leonard Daniels, former CEO, net worth estimated at $120 million, father of Isabella Daniels, CEO of Daniels Global Tech. No. This can't be right. He ran to the meeting room. When he opened the door, the scene was already set. Leonard sat at the head of the table in a flawless suit, his posture relaxed, his eyes unreadable. Isabella stood beside him with an elegant briefcase, surrounded by her team. Mr. Carrington, she said coolly, I believe you've already met my father. I didn't know who he was, Carrington stammered. It was a misunderstanding. Leonard stood, composed. You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to know that I was a human being. That should have been enough. The regional director, Michael Trent, arrived breathless. Miss Daniels, Mr. Daniels, please. Allow us to explain, Gatter. No need, Isabella interrupted. We've made our decision. We're terminating our $5 billion partnership with Eastbrook Financial, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Carrington turned ghost white. Please, he whispered. I can change. Leonard looked at him with the same calm he had held days before. You had the chance to show respect when it mattered. You chose arrogance. Isabella then opened her briefcase and slid a set of documents across the table. Here are the internal communications and public posts that document Mr. Carrington's discriminatory views. If released, they would irreparably damage your reputation. Michael Trent was speechless. Carrington collapsed into his chair, sweat trickling down his face. As father and daughter exited the boardroom, Leonard paused and turned one last time. Do you know the difference between us, Philip? He asked. You judged me by what I wore. I judged you by who you are. And only one of us had anything of value to offer this room. Outside, whispers had already begun. By noon, the entire company knew. By evening, Carrington was unemployed. 3 months later, Daniels Global Tech signed a $5.2 billion deal with Commonwealth National, a bank that respected every client from the first handshake. Not after learning their net worth. Leonard was appointed as senior strategic consultant and used his new office to mentor young professionals facing racial bias and systemic dismissal. 1 year after the incident, Leonard spoke at the National Business Integrity Conference. As he took the stage, he noticed Carrington sitting quietly in the audience, now working for a second-tier insurance firm, a shadow of the executive he once was. Ladies and gentlemen, Leonard began. Today I want to share how 5 seconds of arrogance cost a bank $5 billion. The crowd went silent. The problem wasn't my ID card. It was the man who chose to see it as a barrier, not a bridge. And that, friends, is the price of judgment without respect. The applause was thunderous, and Carrington, head down, knew the lesson had come too late. 3 days after being humiliated at Eastbrook Financial, Leonard Daniels stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his Hugo Boss suit. It had been years since he last wore it. The day he finalized the sale of his first company. Back then, he wore it to honor the two-daughter. Blood, sweat, and decades it had taken him to build something from nothing. Today, he wore it. For another reason. To remind himself, and one arrogant banker, who he really was. Downstairs, his daughter, Isabella Daniels, CEO of Daniels Global Tech, reviewed the final stack of documents with their legal team. Termination clauses, financial penalties, reputational, impact. It was all on the table. "Are you absolutely sure, Dad?" Isabella asked, scanning the clause that would end a $5 billion contract with Eastbrook Financial. "Once we pull the plug, there's no turning back." Leonard looked at her, calm and certain. In business, money can be recovered, but dignity, once lost, takes decades to rebuild. "I didn't teach you to chase numbers. I taught you to stand for something." Her legal advisor, Dr. Harold Evans, nodded solemnly. Clause 17 allows immediate termination if there's evidence of discrimination by the bank or its employees. "The data your father gathered is beyond sufficient." He opened a folder and laid out the evidence. Screenshots of Philip Carrington's LinkedIn. History filled with subtly racist comments. Internal emails leaked by a former Eastbrook employee referring to Latino clients as unstable markets, and others labeling minority entrepreneurs as high risk. Harold exhaled. This isn't just bias. It's systemic. It's cultural. And it's damning. Across town, Philip Carrington was living his usual fantasy. At his favorite downtown restaurant, he posted yet another photo of his perfectly plated meal with the hashtag #executiveLife, basking in compliments from colleagues. He had no idea that every post was being archived and analyzed by Leonard's quietly meticulous team. The next morning at Eastbrook, Carrington strutted into the office, fueled by caffeine and self-congratulation. He had received an email marked urgent, strategic meeting at 10 a.m. And in his mind, it could only mean one thing, a promotion. Maybe even a feature in Forbes, if the Daniels deal closed. "Monica," he said to his assistant, "polish my desk. Make sure we have the specialty coffee blend on hand. Today's the day we make history." What he didn't know was that history was already being written, just not in his favor. At 9:58 a.m., Carrington was informed that the Daniels family had arrived. He smirked. They brought their accountant too? But as he walked into the boardroom, the color drained from his face. At the head of the table sat Leonard Daniels, dignified in his dark suit, and beside him, his daughter Isabella, every bit the commanding CEO. Around them were lawyers, advisors, and partners, all of whom had already seen the documentation Carrington never thought anyone would find. "Mr. Carrington," Isabella said, her voice icy. "You've met my father, haven't you?" I didn't realize that he mattered," Leonard replied. "That he was worth basic respect." Carrington stammered, but it was too late. Isabella opened her briefcase. "We're here to inform you that Daniels Global Tech is terminating its $5 billion agreement with Eastbrook Financial, effective immediately." The silence was thunderous. Michael Trent, Eastbrook's regional director, rushed in, already pale. "Miss Daniels, surely. There's been some miscommunication." "There hasn't," she said. "We've reviewed the behavior of your senior manager. His comments, his conduct, and the bank's failure to create a safe and inclusive environment. This isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about a culture you allowed to grow." Carrington tried to plead, to explain away his behavior as protecting the bank from fraud, but Isabella was prepared. She slid across the table dozens of pages of printed evidence, years of digital arrogance captured in black and white. "We won't be taking this public," Leonard said quietly. "We don't need to. The financial hole you're about to fall into will be loud enough." As the Daniels team left the boardroom, Carrington remained in his seat, no longer the planked gatekeeper, but the example. Within hours, he was fired. Within days, News of the cancelled contract rocked the financial sector. Meanwhile, Daniels Global Tech signed a $5.2 billion deal with Commonwealth National, $200 million more than the Eastbrook offer. Their CEO, Marcus Chan, greeted Leonard at the welcome ceremony with a firm handshake and a statement that would soon go viral. "We believe in shaking hands with people based on their character, not their clothing." Back at Eastbrook, a framed quote was quietly hung in the office once occupied by Carrington, now led by Monica, who had since been promoted. "Respect first, ask question later." And for Leonard Daniels, the man whose ID card had once been tossed to the floor, it was never about revenge. It was about teaching a lesson the world would never forget. 6 months had passed since Leonard Daniels walked out of Eastbrook Financial Bank for the last time, not as a humiliated old man, but as a quiet storm ready to change everything. What began as a simple attempt to open a business account ended in one of the most public, devastating reversals the financial sector had seen in decades. Inside the sleek offices of Daniels Global Tech, Leonard sat in his corner suite, not as a visitor, but now as the senior strategic advisor to one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the nation. His daughter, Isabella Daniels, had grown the company with resilience and vision, but it was Leonard's experience, his hard-earned scars, that gave the firm its spine. On this particular morning, Isabella stood outside a conference room watching her father lean over a table with 2 young entrepreneurs, both in their 20s, both black, both recently turned down by 3 different banks. "You remind me of myself," Leonard said with a smile, tapping one of the business plans on the table. "When I started in the 82nd, they told me I was dreaming too big, so I built it with my own hands. You'll do the same, but you won't have to do it alone." He handed them each a card. Daniels Equity Foundation, for builders no one sees. This was Leonard's new legacy, not vengeance, but restoration. After the fallout with Eastbrook, Leonard and Isabella used the public attention not to punish further, but to rebuild better. They created a fund with $20 million in seed capital to invest in minority-owned startups, especially those rejected due to bias. Within 6 months, the foundation had helped launch 38 businesses, funded 13 tech prototypes, and provided mentorship for over 200 young professionals. In interviews, Leonard never once mentioned Philip Carrington, the manager who threw his platter. "ID on the floor. He's not important," Leonard would say calmly. "He showed me what was broken. That was enough." But others remembered. Carrington had become a case study in business schools nationwide, a cautionary tale of how arrogance in customer service can cost billions. His name appeared in corporate diversity seminars, often followed by the infamous phrase, "Never judge a client by their cover lest that cover owns the book." Inside Eastbrook Financial, the damage went far beyond money. Top clients began pulling out quietly, unsure if they too would face discrimination. Investors demanded audits. The boardroom turned to chaos. Within weeks, Carrington was terminated, and Monica Reyes, once his overlooked assistant, was promoted to regional manager. She began a massive overhaul, launching the Equity First program, retraining staff, and forming a new advisory board focused on inclusion. On the wall of her office, Monica framed a line that Leonard had once said, "Respect first, ask questions later." But Leonard had moved on. Daniels Global Tech was now partnering with Commonwealth National Bank, a more forward-thinking institution that offered even better terms than Eastbrook. Commonwealth's CEO, Marcus Chan, publicly praised the Daniels family. "They don't just build tech, they build people." At the foundation's first annual gala, Leonard stood on stage in front of hundreds of young entrepreneurs whose lives had already been transformed. "I never wanted to be famous," he began, holding the same ID card that once clattered across the marble floor of Eastbrook. "I wanted to build homes, then companies. Now I build confidence for those who've been told they don't belong." The applause lasted minutes. In the back of the room, Isabella wiped a tear as she watched her father, a man who had once been cast aside, become the heartbeat of a movement. Meanwhile, Carrington sat alone in a modest insurance office downtown. No more fine suits. No more hashtags. Every job interview he'd attended since the incident had ended with polite rejection. The financial world had moved on without him. One afternoon, as he sipped coffee in a quiet cafe, the door opened and Leonard walked in, wearing simple clothes. The same man. But this time, Carrington knew exactly who he was. Leonard noticed him, nodded politely, and placed his order. As he passed Carrington's table, Carrington stood abruptly. "Mr. Daniels," he said, his voice cracking. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were that day." Leonard paused. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said gently. "You just needed to know that I was a person. That should have been enough." "I can change," Carrington insisted. "I've learned." Leonard smiled kindly but firmly. "I truly hope you have. Because the next person you judge may not have a daughter who can cancel $5 billion. But they still deserve respect." He left without another word, leaving Carrington alone, with a bitter truth and a silent cafe. Months later, Daniels Equity Foundation expanded nationwide, partnering with universities and launching a program that connected rejected entrepreneurs with angel investors. Leonard's motto spread far beyond the tech world. The best revenge is not revenge. It's building something so strong, your enemies regret not being part of it. And as Isabella looked out from her office one afternoon, watching a new batch of founders walk into the mentorship center, she whispered words that echoed everything her father had taught her. Dignity doesn't shout, it builds. Inside the sterile gray walls of Raleigh County Correctional Facility, Philip Carrington sat, alone at a cold metal table, his eyes fixed on the tiny window that offered nothing but bars and sky. He wasn't wearing a designer suit today, just a standard-issue beige uniform. His tie, collection, his corner office, and his reputation were long gone. All that remained was the echo of his mistake in the face of the man he had underestimated. It had been nearly a year since Carrington had tossed Leonard Daniels' ID onto the marble floor of Eastbrook Financial Bank and laughed while doing it. Back then, he believed he was defending corporate standards. Now, those same standards had crushed him. He had expected Leonard to walk away humiliated. But instead, Leonard had walked out with quiet purpose and returned as the father of Isabella Daniels, CEO of Daniels Global Tech, and the key to a $5 billion partnership Carrington's bank had desperately needed. That partnership was gone. So was Carrington's job, his career, his future. And what haunted him the most wasn't the firing, the financial collapse, or the disgrace. It was the look in Leonard's eyes when he said, "You judged me by my appearance. I judged you by your character, and only one of us had anything of value to offer." He had replayed that line in his head 1,000 times. He'd whispered it in the dark. He had finally realized what it meant, and he hated that it took losing everything to understand it. It was Monica Reyes, now his former assistant and current regional manager of Eastbrook, who had delivered the final blow, a framed quote in her office that read, "Respect first, ask questions later," a quote Philip once would have rolled his eyes at. Now, it burned. But it was another moment that would sting even deeper. It happened the day Leonard Daniels returned to the very institution that had disrespected him, not as a client, but as a keynote speaker at the National Banking Convention. The audience was packed with CEOs, policymakers, and executives from every corner of the finance world. And seated near the back, in quiet anonymity, was Carrington. He hadn't planned to attend. He didn't want to. But part of him knew he had to. When Leonard took the stage, there was no bitterness in his voice, only measured dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, Today I'm not going to talk about money. I'm going to talk about 5 seconds. 5 seconds of judgment. 5 seconds that cost one institution $5 billion. But more importantly, 5 seconds that revealed the moral foundation beneath the propin. Marble floor. A hush fell across the room. Leonard recounted the story, not with vengeance, but with clarity. He spoke of the moment. His ID was thrown away. The silence. The smirks. The dismissal. I wasn't angry, Leonard continued. I was certain that I'd just witnessed not a rogue act but a symptom. The symptom of a system that confuses arrogance with excellence. He paused, then added, what we tolerate in our boardrooms echoes through our lobbies. Carrington bowed his head. The words pierced deeper than any reprimand he'd received. Later that evening, Leonard walked through the lobby of the convention center. He was surrounded by young entrepreneurs asking for advice, shaking his hand, calling him sir and mentor. But then he saw Carrington standing alone by the exit, eyes downcast. Leonard stopped. Good evening, Mr. Carrington. Carrington turned, startled. Mr. Daniels. He began. I came to apologize. I wanted to say I was wrong. That day, I didn't know who you were. Leonard looked at him, eyes steady. But you knew I was someone. I do now, Carrington said, voice trembling. And I regret everything. Leonard gave a soft nod. Regret is good. Change is better. Then he added, almost kindly, you judged me by the clothes I wore. But I wore those clothes to test something. The integrity of the place that wanted my company's trust. You showed me your truth, and I thank you for that. It helped me protect my daughter's legacy. Carrington's throat tightened. I've changed. I hope you have, Leonard replied, because the next person you dismiss may not be wealthy or powerful, but they'll still deserve respect, and you won't get a second chance. With everyone, he walked away without another word, leaving Carrington standing there, still breathing, still living, but no longer blind to the cost of his pride. Today, Carrington works quietly for a small credit union in rural North Carolina. He doesn't wear gold ties or post online. He volunteers at community job fairs. He reads leadership books. And every morning, he stares at a card he keeps in his wallet. Not a business card, but a folded copy of the speech Leonard Daniels gave that day. One line is underlined. The difference between dignity and arrogance is how you treat someone you think can't help you. And slowly, painfully, Carrington is trying to become a man who understands that difference before it's too late again. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Leonard Daniels sat quietly in the back row of the National Banking Convention, waiting for his moment. The same man whose ID card had once been tossed aside like garbage now stood as a symbol of resilience. When he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. I'm not here to talk about profit margins, Leonard began, his voice steady. I'm here to talk to about 5 seconds. The 5 seconds it takes to either respect someone or destroy their dignity. As he spoke, Philip Carrington, now a forgotten name in the banking world, listened from the tumultuous crowd. His once bright career had dimmed into obscurity. Fired, disgraced, and now working in anonymity. He knew this story all too well. He had lived it. Leonard ended with words that would be quoted for years. The difference between respectful service and discrimination isn't in how rich the customer is. It's in how human the server chooses to be. And as the audience applauded, Carrington realized, some mistakes echo forever, but the power to prevent them lies in one choice. Dignity is not earned by wealth, status, or title. It's a birthright. The moment you treat someone as less than, you reveal more about your own character than theirs. Sometimes, the people we dismiss are the ones who hold the power to change our future. If this story touched you, drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated or shown someone kindness that changed everything? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more powerful stories that remind us. Respect costs nothing, but its value is everything.